the last thing I want to, and it's probably the scariest three letters that a white person can read, and that is the EFF. I'm interested in what drew you to the EFF, your continual support for the EFF, and if you really think Juju has that juju.
So is it? I first have to answer why I think white people fear the EFF.
No. We've moved away from that. I've decided mid podcast that it's a silly game.
Okay, so I mean, for me, it post 94. I think we must look at the EFF. We mustn't look at the EFF outside the political developments of South Africa, right? Because what happens in South Africa is that post 94, there is a group, even within the ANC, which is quite frustrated and quite agitated about the slow rate of growth and development. So I think what we must understand, we must try and understand the EFF as a political development of South Africa and what happens within the liberation movement or the former liberation movement within South Africa, that is the ANC. You know, so after 94, there's a group in South Africa, a group of people, call them fighters, call them revolutionaries, call them young people, who raise the question to the old generation to say that what happened in 1994 was not an end in itself, but rather the political freedom that we gained in 1994. The fact that we can enter the same shopping malls as white people, the fact that we can use the same toilets as white people, the fact that we can now go to the same schools and use the same buses is not, in fact, liberation in of itself, because political freedom without economic freedom is meaningless. So we must be able to locate the EFF within that logic and within that thinking to say that we are not done and a lot still needs to be done in as far as the Black poor majority is concerned. So the EFF is a movement which then raises this question. In fact, I would even go as far and make this controversial, or if you want to call it, to say that the EFF is not a movement that breaks away from the ANC, but rather it's the ANC that leaves the EFF. Because if you look at the ideology of the EFF, it's not a new ideology. It's rather a continuation of the liberation movement of South Africa, the broad liberation movement of South Africa, trying to realize a South Africa that belongs to all who live in it, where everyone shares the land equally, where everyone shares the fruits and the benefits of South Africa's economy. So the EFF raises that fundamental question to say that, yes, we have political freedom, yes, we can vote, but it is meaningful for me to every 4 or 5 years go have this symbolic gesture, which is not small, by the way, this symbolic gesture of voting, but I have to go back to my shack. I go and vote, I have to go back to no service delivery. I go and vote, I have to go back to unemployment. I go and vote, I have to go back to not being able to afford a loaf of bread. So the EFF locates the economic question as a second stage that must happen soon in the sort of liberation of Black people within South Africa. So I think that's what drives me to the EFF. And I think another one, lastly before, is that it's the only movement that really confronts these difficult questions that many other political organizations would otherwise either, if not shy away from, but they would sort of tiptoe around them. But I think it takes a really strong stance, and purposefully so, to attack difficult conversations and raise difficult conversations in South Africa, even if it means that certain people may be uncomfortable. Otherwise, I think we live a lie, which we probably have been living for the past odd 20 years, of this rainbow nation. And the risk with that, and I'll close with this, because I think CIC, Julius Malema, always says this. He says, a revolution in South Africa is inevitable, right? He says that there is no one in their right mind who can think that you can suppress and oppress a majority for a long time, and you think that a majority can live under such conditions. There's no way. A Kailicha, a Guguletu, and Alexandra, the township situation is an unsustainable situation. Like, you cannot keep people under those conditions for a long time and think that they're not going to do anything about it. But the risk we run is that if we do not lead this as a vanguard party, we run the risk of having an unled revolution where people just go around guns blazing. I think that's the one that white people should fear, but not one which is led through legislation, through sort of things like public engagement. I mean, the EFF is not calling for the collapse of the state. And which is why I never understand really what do people mean when they call it fascist? What do they mean when they call it populist? Because if you look at the manner in which it's even been taking political battles, it's making use of the courts. It makes use of the constitutional courts. It makes use of things like public debate, public discourse, institutions like parliament. And yes, it pushes them to their limits because it tries to expose how far they can go. But it uses them and only looks at protest action as sort of one like how could I say this, as a final sort of a step, but it doesn't neglect the institutions that currently exist in South Africa. But I think what would make people fear it is that I think they fear change, man. I think people fear a South Africa where really, because they've not seen it, because they don't know what it may look like. Because, like you said, if you're a white kid and all you've seen of black people is that they're either domestic workers, they're shop attendants, they're petrol attendants. Now, if there's a fellow, if there's an organization that is saying to you, you and that person can be equal, you and your domestic worker can be equal, can have equal standing in society, can be seen to have equal dignity. It's that realization or the lack thereof that I think brings the uncomfortability. But I don't think, because the message of the movement is in English and it's quite clear and simple. I don't even think white people think that the EFF is going to push them to the sea. I don't think they genuinely believe that. But I think yeah.
Particularly, I must say, you've given me many EFF speeches over the years, and I think that could have been the most rousing one by far. And I just want to not offer a rebuttal, but weigh in on a few points before we wrap this up. And like you briefly mentioned there, I don't think any white person really believes the EFF are going to drive them into the sea. If that is the case, it's just depressing. But more so to the fact that, because I've often called you out and I say you're in love with a populist, and over the course of what you said, well, can you be angry with a populist if the majority are suffering, and for good reason? This populist narrative is finding roots in a country that's deeply not only divided but hurts economically and otherwise. And one thing that I really like what you said there is, a couple of questions ago I just asked you, or I just said, like, you know what, Sihle, we're going to have to find a way to work out this race and class issue. And that's you literally offered an answer in terms of the EFF, wherein it's economic freedom, and I think that's a slogan on their website, economic freedom in our lifetime. That's change that you can actually measure and see. And like you said towards the end, I think people are fundamentally afraid of change. And I could even go so far and be a bit controversial myself and say that maybe traditional African communities are as scared of this change as white communities. But we'll leave that for another conversation another day.